February 1980. The name Ace Frehley was everywhere. Madison Square Garden, Platinum Records, screaming fans. But for 72 hours, the man behind the silver makeup simply vanished. No trace, no call, no explanation. What happened during those lost hours would haunt him for decades, and the truth, hidden in hotel records, witness testimonies, and Ace's own fragmented memories, reveals the darkest moment in rock and roll history. The clock read 11:47 p.m. when Ace Frehley walked out of Electric Lady Studios in Greenwich Village. February 14th, 1980. Valentine's Day. The irony wasn't lost on anyone who knew him. Inside, the rest of Kiss was laying down tracks for what would become the Unmasked album. But Ace had stopped contributing weeks ago. His parts were being quietly replaced. His solos, once the backbone of Kiss's sound, were now considered unreliable. The bottle in his hand wasn't his first of the night, and it wouldn't be his last. Studio engineer Eddie Kramer watched him leave. Years later, in a rarely cited interview, Kramer described Ace's eyes that night as completely vacant, like someone had already left their body. The silver Corvette peeled out onto 8th Street, heading north. Security cameras at the corner of 6th Avenue captured the vehicle running a red light at 11:53 p.m. After that, nothing. For the next 72 hours, Ace Frehley disappeared from the face of the earth. The search begins. By noon on February 15th. Panic had set in. Kiss's management made the first calls. Ace's wife, Jeanette, hadn't heard from him. His parents in the Bronx knew nothing. Tour manager Fritz Postlethwaite began calling every bar, hotel, and known hangout in Manhattan. Nothing. Gene Simmons, typically the band's unshakable businessman, showed genuine fear for the first time anyone could remember. "If we don't find him by tonight," he told Paul Stanley, "we might not find him at all." What the band didn't know yet was that Ace had driven straight through Manhattan, over the George Washington Bridge, and into New Jersey. His destination wasn't planned. It wasn't rational. In the fog of alcohol and prescription pills, Ace had simply driven until the city lights disappeared behind him. Somewhere near Patterson, the Corvette ran out of gas on a service road. Ace abandoned it there, keys still in the ignition, and walked into the night. Before we continue this story, I need to ask you something. If you want to hear the untold stories of rock and roll's greatest legends, the moments that never made it to the official biographies, please subscribe to this channel. What you're about to hear has never been fully told before. To understand those 72 hours, you have to understand where Ace Frehley was mentally in early 1980. The previous year had been a nightmare disguised as success. The Dynasty album had gone platinum, but Ace's contributions were minimal. Peter, Chris, the original drummer, was being pushed out of the band. Ace knew he was next. The drinking, which had always been part of the rock and roll lifestyle, had become something else entirely. Something darker. Something that consumed every waking moment. Friends from that period describe a man at war with himself. The Paul Daniel Frehley who grew up in the Bronx, the kid who fell in love with the guitar, was trapped inside the Space Ace persona. Every night he put on that silver makeup, he felt himself disappear a little more. The character that made him famous had become a prison, and the only key he had was at the bottom of a bottle. But there was something else happening too. Something Ace wouldn't talk about for decades. The pressure from Gene and Paul had reached a breaking point. They wanted him to check into rehab. They wanted him to get clean or get out. The ultimatum came during a band meeting on February 13th, just hours before Ace walked out of the studio. Paul Stanley's words, according to those present, were brutal. "You're killing yourself, and you're killing this band. We can't watch it anymore." Ace said nothing. He just stood up and left. The next day, he vanished. February 16th, Day 3. While search parties combed Manhattan and New Jersey, state police had been quietly notified. Ace Frehley was in a place beyond geography. The Red Rose Motor Lodge in Wayne, New Jersey. A forgotten roadside motel where truckers slept and questions weren't asked. The manager, a man named Vincent Calabrese, remembered the guest in room 17 very clearly. "He checked in around 3 a.m. on the 15th, Calabrese recalled in a 2006 interview for a New Jersey music documentary. "No luggage. Paid cash for 3 nights up front. Looked like hell. I didn't recognize him at first, because he wasn't wearing the makeup, you know? But there was something about his eyes. He looked like a man who'd already made his decision." What decision? Calabrese wouldn't elaborate, but the implication hung in the air like smoke. In room 17, Ace had barricaded himself with a case of Jack Daniels and a bag full of pills. Valium, Quaaludes, whatever he could get. The television stayed on continuously, broadcasting images Ace didn't see, sounds he didn't hear. Hotel records show he never once called for room service, never ordered food, never answered the phone. On the nightstand, Ace had placed a photograph of his daughter Monique. She was 3 years old. In his haze, he stared at that photo and wrestled with a terrible question. Was she better off without him? Would Kiss be better off? Would the world notice if Space Ace simply ceased to exist? But something happened on that third night. Something that would save Ace Frehley's life. And it came from the most unexpected source imaginable, February 17th. 2:17 a.m., the phone in room 17 rang. It had been ringing periodically for hours, but this time, in a moment of clarity or perhaps just exhaustion, Ace picked up. The voice on the other end wasn't from Kiss management. It wasn't Jeanette. It wasn't his parents. It was Eddie Van Halen. How Eddie got the number remains a mystery. Some say a sympathetic desk clerk at the motel recognized Ace and called a radio station, and word spread through the rock community like wildfire. Others claim Eddie had been systematically calling every motel in a 50-mile radius of New York City. Whatever the truth, that phone call became one of the most important conversations in rock history. Though no recording exists, and both men have been deliberately vague about the details. What is known comes from fragments. Eddie, who was battling his own demons with alcohol, spoke to Ace for 47 minutes. He didn't lecture. He didn't judge. He simply talked, guitarist to guitarist, about the weight of fame, the isolation of being misunderstood, the feeling that the instrument in your hands is the only honest thing in your life. He told me something I never forgot, Ace said in a 1996 interview. He said, "The guitar doesn't care if you're drunk or sober. It just wants you to play. But you have to be alive to play it." By the time the call ended, Ace was crying. Not the quiet tears of resignation, but the raw, ugly sobs of a man who realized he still wanted to live. He didn't want to be Space Ace anymore. He didn't want to be in Kiss if it meant losing himself. But he wanted to play guitar. That was the one true thing left. February 18th, 9:32 a.m., Ace Frehley walked into the lobby of the Red Rose Motor Lodge, past Vincent Calabrese, who watched silently, and out into the gray New Jersey morning. He had no car, no money left, but he had Vincent's phone, and he made one call. To Fritz Postlethwaite, Kiss's tour manager. "Come get me," was all he said, and gave the address. 90 minutes later, Fritz arrived with two security personnel. They found Ace sitting on the curb outside the motel, his silver Corvette still abandoned miles away, looking like a ghost. Fritz later described the moment. He looked me right in the eye and said, "I can't do this anymore." I thought he meant kiss, but he meant the lie. He meant pretending he was okay. The drive back to Manhattan was silent. Fritz didn't push. He didn't ask questions. He just drove. When they reached the city, Ace didn't go to the studio. He didn't go home. He went to his parents' house in the Bronx, the house where he first picked up a guitar, where Paul Daniel Frehley was born, long before Space Ace existed. He stayed there for 3 days, sleeping in his childhood bedroom, trying to remember who he was before the makeup, before the fame, before the bottle became his only friend. When Ace finally rejoined Kiss, something fundamental had shifted. Gene and Paul could see it. The rest of the crew could see it. Ace was physically present, but spiritually he'd already left. The remaining shows of the Unmasked Tour were mechanical. His solos, when he played them, were technically perfect, but emotionally hollow. The spark that made Ace Frehley one of the most innovative guitarists of the 70s had dimmed. Behind closed doors, the conversations were brutal. Gene wanted Ace in rehab immediately. Paul wanted him out of the band. Ace wanted neither. He wanted control of his life back, even if that life was falling apart. The compromise was fragile. Ace would stay through the tour, but after that, his future with Kiss was uncertain. Everyone knew it. Nobody said it. The 72 hours in Wayne, New Jersey, became a forbidden topic. Band meetings didn't mention it. Interviews skirted around it. Even years later, when Ace wrote his autobiography, the details were deliberately vague. "I went through a dark period," he wrote. "I made some bad decisions, but I survived." That was all he'd say publicly. The rest remained locked in room 17 of a forgotten motel, a ghost story only Ace fully understood. What those 72 hours cost Ace Frehley wasn't measured in lost recording sessions or canceled appearances. It was measured in trust. Gene and Paul never fully trusted him again. Every tour, every album, there was an unspoken question. Will Ace show up? Will he be sober? Will this be the time he doesn't come back? That erosion of trust, more than any musical difference, would eventually drive Ace out of Kiss permanently in 1982. But there was another cost. One Ace carried alone. The knowledge that he'd come within inches of ending everything. In interviews decades later, he'd described those 72 hours as the closest I ever came to not waking up. The photograph of his daughter Monique, which he'd stared at in that motel room, became a talisman. He carried it everywhere, in his guitar case, in his wallet. A reminder of what he almost lost. Friends from that period noticed changes. Ace became more withdrawn, more suspicious of the people around him. The easy camaraderie that once existed between the band members evaporated. Studio sessions became tense, silent affairs. Paul and Gene would record their parts separately from Ace. Communication happened through intermediaries. The brotherhood that formed Kiss was dead, even if the band limped forward. Vincent Calabresi, the motel manager, never sold his story to the tabloids. He never gave interviews beyond that single documentary appearance, but he kept the registration card from room 17, with Ace's scrawled signature barely legible. In 2014, shortly before his death, Calabresi donated that card to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. It sits in their archives now, a piece of paper that represents the moment one of rock's greatest guitarists stood on the edge of oblivion. Museum curators who've seen it describe the handwriting as disturbed, shaky, the signature of someone not in control. Next to Ace's name, in different ink and clearly written, later, are 3 words in Calabresi's handwriting. He survived. Barely. That registration card tells a story the official Kiss narrative never acknowledged. It tells the truth about fame's cost, about addiction's grip, about the razor-thin line between self-destruction and salvation. It tells the story of 72 hours that should have ended in tragedy, but instead became the catalyst for eventual change. The phone call from Eddie Van Halen remained one of rock's most intriguing mysteries for decades. Eddie himself rarely discussed it, deflecting questions with jokes or changing the subject entirely. But in a 2015 interview, just months before his own health would decline dramatically, Eddie opened up briefly about that night. "I was drunk when I made that call," Eddie admitted. "I'd been following the rumors about Ace missing, and something in me just knew. I knew where his head was because mine was in the same place. We never met before that call. But guitarists, man, we speak a different language. We understand each other in ways normal people don't. I told him things about my own drinking, my own fears. I told him the truth, that the music doesn't forgive us for dying. It just goes silent." The connection between Ace and Eddie, forged in that desperate 2 a.m. phone call, lasted years. They'd cross paths at industry events, festivals, award shows, always a nod, always a knowing look. 2 men who'd stared into the same abyss and somehow stepped back. When Eddie passed away in 2020, Ace posted a single photograph on social media. A phone, off the hook, with the caption, "Thank you for picking up." Those who knew the story understood. Those who didn't never asked. By late 1980, the situation in Kiss had become untenable. The Unmasked album underperformed. The tour was plagued with problems. Ace's attendance was spotty. When he did show up, the tension backstage was suffocating. Gene and Paul had made their decision. After the tour, Ace was out. They just hadn't told him yet. The official narrative would later claim it was a mutual decision, that Ace wanted to pursue solo work, that there were creative differences. The truth was darker and simpler. Ace Frehley, the space ace who helped build Kiss into an empire, was being fired, and everybody knew it. The final shows of 1980 became a farewell tour nobody acknowledged. Fans cheered, oblivious. The band played their hits, mechanical and cold. Ace's solos were technically perfect and emotionally dead. On December 31st, 1980, Kiss played what would be Ace's last show with the band for years. New Year's Eve at the Palladium in New York. Hometown, full circle. During the encore, Ace looked out at the crowd, 20,000 faces screaming for Space Ace, and felt nothing. The 72 hours in Wayne had killed something in him that could never be resurrected. Not the music, not the passion, but the ability to pretend. Couldn't wear the mask anymore, literal or figurative. It would take Ace Frehley nearly 3 decades to fully discuss those 72 hours. His 2011 autobiography touched on it briefly. Interviews hinted at darkness. But the complete truth didn't emerge until a 2018 podcast appearance, where Ace, older and weathered and finally sober for years, opened up completely. "I was going to die in that room," he said, voice steady but eyes distant. "That was the plan. I had the pills. I had the booze. I had the intention. The only thing that stopped me was that picture of my daughter and Eddie's voice on that phone. He reminded me that I wasn't Space Ace. I was Paul Frehley from the Bronx, who loved playing guitar more than anything. The makeup, the band, the fame, all of it was extra. The guitar was the truth. He paused, collecting himself. Those 72 hours taught me something important. You can't run from yourself. You can drive to New Jersey. You can hide in a motel. You can drink until you forget your name. But you're still there underneath it all. And eventually, you have to decide, am I going to face this person, or am I going to destroy him? I chose to face him. Barely, but I chose. The interviewer asked if he regretted leaving Kiss. Ace's answer was immediate. I regret how it happened. I regret the pain I caused. But leaving saved my life. If I'd stayed, you wouldn't be talking to me right now. Space Ace would be a tragedy, not a legend. Those 72 hours in February 1980 changed more than just Ace Frehley's life. They changed Kiss's trajectory forever. Without Ace, the band brought in replacement guitarists. First Vinnie Vincent, then Mark St. John, then Bruce Kulick. All talented, all professional, none of them Space Ace. The original magic, the chemistry that made early Kiss unstoppable, was gone. Albums still sold, tours still happened. But something essential had died in Wayne, New Jersey, even if the band stumbled forward for years. For Ace, leaving Kiss began a long, brutal journey toward sobriety and self-discovery. Frehley's Comet, his post-Kiss band, struggled commercially, but gave Ace something more valuable: autonomy. He was Paul Frehley again, playing guitar on his terms. The demons didn't disappear. The bottle still called. But the 72 hours had taught him something. Survival was possible. Difficult, painful, often lonely, but possible. Musicians who battled addiction in the 80s and 90s often cited Ace's story as a touchstone. Not because he conquered his demons immediately or permanently, but because he was honest about the struggle. He didn't pretend sobriety was easy. He didn't claim some miraculous transformation. He admitted the truth. Every day was a choice. Every day was hard. Every day he chose to keep playing guitar instead of destroying himself. When Kiss reunited in 1996, with the original lineup including Ace, many saw it as a cash grab, a nostalgia tour for aging fans. And maybe it was, partially. But for Ace, putting on that silver makeup again was something more complex. It was confronting the ghost of Space Ace, the character who almost killed Paul Frehley. Backstage before the first reunion show, Ace sat in front of the mirror, makeup kit in front of him, hands shaking slightly. Gene Simmons walked in, saw him frozen. For a moment, neither man spoke. Then Gene said something he'd never said before. "You don't have to do this if it's too much." Ace met his eyes in the mirror. "I know," he replied, "but I need to. I need to prove I can wear the mask without it wearing me." The reunion tours were successful but bittersweet. Ace was older, more cautious, more protective of his sobriety and mental health. When the touring became too intense, too reminiscent of the bad old days, Ace left again. This time, there was no 72-hour disappearance, no motel room crisis, just a clean, professional exit. The difference was profound. He'd learned the lesson Wayne, New Jersey taught him. You can leave without destroying yourself in the process. Today, the Red Rose Motor Lodge is gone. Demolished in 2009 to make way for a shopping center. But Room 17's legacy lives on in a different way. Rock historians point to those 72 hours as a turning point not just for Ace Frehley, but for how the music industry handles addiction. The silence, the enabling, the pretending everything was fine while artists spiraled, slowly began to crack. Ace's eventual openness about his struggles gave permission to other musicians to speak their truth. His honesty about the 72 hours, about standing on the edge of suicide, about the phone call that saved him, became a blueprint for survival. Not a perfect blueprint, not an easy one, but a real one. The photograph of Monique that Ace carried through those dark days sits in a frame in his Connecticut home now. His daughter, grown and with children of her own, knows the story, knows that her father's love for her, represented in that picture, was the anchor that kept him from drifting away completely. He told me once, Monique said in a rare interview, that I saved his life, and I didn't even know I was doing it. Just by existing. Just by being in that photograph. Vincent Calabresi's donation of the registration card to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame included a handwritten note. Museum archivists keep it with the artifact, though it's rarely displayed. The note reads, "This is the signature of a man at the end of his rope, but ropes can be climbed back up if you're strong enough and someone throws you a lifeline." Mr. Frehley found his strength. He climbed back. This card is proof that the darkest moment isn't always the final one. Calabresi never met Ace again after that February morning when he walked out of the motel, but he followed his career, bought his albums, watched the reunion tours. When Ace released his 2014 solo album Space Invader, Calabresi was in the audience at a New Jersey show, unrecognized in the crowd. After the encore, Ace did something unusual. He addressed the audience directly, speaking instead of singing. "I almost didn't make it to this stage," Ace said, guitar hanging from his shoulder. "There was a time when I thought Space Ace was going to die in a forgotten place, and nobody would care. But somebody cared. A phone call, a photograph, a choice to wake up one more time. If you're in a dark place right now, if you think there's no way out, I'm telling you, there is. It's hard, it's painful, but it's there." Vincent Calabresi died 3 months later. His family found, among his possessions, every Ace Frehley album ever released, even the obscure ones. On the back of one CD case in faded ink, Vincent had written, "I was there. He survived." 45 years after those 72 hours, Ace Frehley is still here, still playing guitar, still performing. The demons haven't disappeared. Addiction doesn't work that way. But he's learned to live with them, to acknowledge them without surrendering to them. The lessons of Wayne, New Jersey, of Room 17, of the edge of oblivion, stay with him. In interviews, when asked about his legacy, Ace rarely mentions Kiss first. He mentions survival. He mentions the guitar. He mentions the choice he made, barely, in a roadside motel when the world thought he was gone. "Space Ace is a character," he says. "Paul Frehley is a man. The character made me famous. But the man, the real man, had to learn how to survive fame, had to learn that the makeup comes off. And when it does, you better know who's underneath. The silver makeup, the platform boots, the smoking guitar, all of it is part of rock history. But the real legacy of Ace Frehley isn't Space Ace. It's the man who survived 72 hours in hell and came back to tell the truth about it. Who showed a generation of musicians that addiction isn't failure, but fighting back is success. Who proved that the darkest moment can become the catalyst for eventual redemption if you're willing to pick up the phone, look at the photograph, and choose to live one more day. Epilogue: The phone that saved rock and roll. In Eddie Van Halen's estate, sold after his death, there was a single item Eddie had specifically requested be preserved: a phone bill from February 1980. One call, 47 minutes, to a New Jersey number. The cost, $6.35. The value, immeasurable. That phone bill now belongs to Eddie's son Wolfgang, who understands what his father did that night, even if the full conversation will never be known. Ace Frehley and Wolfgang Van Halen have never met, but Wolfgang sent Ace a message after Eddie's death. "My dad told me once that the best thing he ever did was pick up the phone that night. He said he didn't save your life. You saved your own life. He just reminded you that you wanted to." The 72 hours in Wayne, New Jersey, should have been the end of Space Ace. Instead, they became the beginning of Paul Frehley's real journey. A journey away from the mask, toward the man. Away from the mythology, toward the truth. Away from the edge of oblivion, toward the painful, difficult, beautiful work of survival. Every guitar solo Ace plays now, every note that rings from his silver Les Paul, carries the echo of that choice made barely, desperately, in a forgotten motel room. The choice to live. The choice to play. The choice to survive.